It's our stories. Welcome to a world where real stories sounds like a movie script.
I grew up feeling like I was living in a house that was not really mine, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me but never seemed to see me for who I truly was, only who I was in comparison to my older brother, David. From the earliest memories I have, he was always larger than life in the household, not just physically, though he was taller and stronger even when we were children, but in terms of presence and authority, the kind of person who could fill a room with his arrogance and make everyone else feel small without even trying. There was only a year between us, yet it might as well have been a decade. That single year seemed to condense into a lifetime of pain and humiliation for me. He was violent in ways that left marks not only on my body, but on my sense of self-worth. He would hit me, push me, and steal what was mine, simply because he felt entitled, as though everything I possessed automatically belonged to him as well. And no one ever stopped him. My parents had their favorites, and he was the golden child, the shining star who could do no wrong, whose mistakes were excused and whose victories were celebrated, while I existed in the background, quietly learning to swallow my anger and disappointment because speaking up had never done any good. By the time I turned 18, I realized I could no longer live under that suffocating hierarchy, under constant judgment and unfair treatment, always aware that my needs, my feelings, my belongings, even my very existence, were secondary to his whims. So I left home, seeking freedom, hoping to carve out a space where I could breathe without being constantly overshadowed. My uncle, a retired police officer, welcomed me into his home with a warmth I had never experienced in my own family, offering a sanctuary where rules, respect, and fairness mattered. He even helped me acquire a decommissioned Crown Victoria, an old police vehicle that became instantly precious to me. It wasn't just a car, it was my independence, my literal and figurative way of moving through the world without being at the mercy of anyone else's recklessness. I loved that car with a fierce, almost irrational intensity, and it quickly became my symbol of freedom in a life that had felt constrained for too long. David, of course, could not tolerate it. He had gone through 3 decrepit cars by that point, each of them rusted, dented, and incapable of functioning properly. Yet he drove them with the same sense of entitlement and carelessness that he carried throughout his life. Meanwhile, my Crown Victoria remained reliable, sturdy, almost mocking in its persistence. When his last car finally died after slamming into a pole, he came to me asking to borrow mine, and I refused, a sense of dread crawling over me like ice up my spine. I could see exactly what would happen if I handed over my car. Recklessness, possible injury, damage, and the inevitable disaster that had always followed him. The refusal sparked the usual backlash. My parents called, insisting, demanding, pressuring me to just let it go, as if my autonomy was an obstacle to be overcome rather than a legitimate boundary to respect. But I could not. I would not. My car was my lifeline, my independence, and I had fought too hard to let it be violated again. My uncle, observing everything, gave me a quiet, approving nod and a high five, silently telling me that standing my ground was the right thing, that defending oneself is not selfish but essential, a lesson I had desperately needed to internalize over the years. I felt a surge of pride and fear all at once, knowing that this confrontation with my parents would not be the end, but just the beginning of a conflict that had always defined my existence within that household. A few days later, the anxiety that had been quietly simmering exploded when I came home from work to find the car missing. Panic gripped me immediately, a cold, paralyzing fear that twisted my stomach into knots. My first instinct was to call David repeatedly, but he did not answer. When I confronted my parents, they initially denied any knowledge of the situation, forcing me to consider involving the police. Only then did the truth surface. He had taken my car. The rage that boiled inside me was volcanic, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and betrayal so profound it threatened to consume my thoughts entirely. This was not a simple misstep. This was a repeated pattern of disrespect, negligence, and entitlement that had gone unchecked for years, finally erupting in a tangible, almost catastrophic event. When David returned in my car, the audacity of him holding up a set of keys he had purchased online to justify taking what was mine left me stunned. My car was more than metal and rubber. It was my autonomy, my freedom, my symbol of finally being able to live without being constantly subjected to his recklessness and my parents' favoritism. The audacity and blatant disregard for boundaries made my blood run cold. I realized then that I needed a permanent safeguard. My uncle, anticipating future incidents, installed a tracking device in my car. That small piece of technology became a lifeline, a way to monitor the vehicle and, by extension, the chaos that inevitably followed my brother. Christmas arrived with its typical cold winds and slick roads, and I was attempting to enjoy the holiday gathering despite the lingering anxiety, the icy roads underfoot forcing me to drive carefully, aware that one misstep could be disastrous. Yet the false sense of security shattered when I realized that my car was gone once more. Panic surged through me, heart hammering against my ribs as I checked the tracking app and saw the small dot representing my car moving miles away, heading straight for a situation I had long feared. My brother had taken it again, a reckless impulse threatening to turn a holiday into tragedy. Following the tracker with my uncle and my parents' minivan, we found him in the car, nose deep in a snow-filled ditch, a scene that provoked a tumult of relief and fury within me. He was visibly terrified, admitting he had been drinking, and yet the enormity of his negligence could not be ignored. The police arrived soon after, corroborating the sequence of events and exposing my parents' attempts to mislead them about who had been driving. David's license had been suspended from a previous accident, compounding the severity of the situation. Witnessing his fear as he was cuffed while my mother cried and my father fumed was surreal. A mix of vindication and disgust, relief and disbelief. Eventually, David apologized and took responsibility for repairing the damage to my car, a gesture that, while necessary, also symbolized the establishment of boundaries that had long been ignored. The damage, superficial as it was, served as a tangible reminder that reckless actions have consequences, and that respect for others' property, safety, and independence is not negotiable. My parents, confronted with the undeniable truth, were forced to reckon with the consequences of their favoritism and their habitual enabling of my brother's behavior. And for the first time, I felt a sense of vindication, a realization that standing firm on my principles could yield justice even in the most chaotic circumstances. Even now, reflecting on that Christmas, the cold, the snow, the panic, and the relief all blend together into a vivid tableau of lessons learned at great emotional cost. It taught me, perhaps more painfully than any childhood scolding or parental argument ever could, that protecting oneself and enforcing boundaries is essential, that fairness is not something to hope for passively, and that the chaos of a reckless relative, when unchecked, can spiral into tangible, almost irreparable harm. Through it all, my Crown Victoria survived. My independence remained intact, and I discovered the limits of endurance, the importance of vigilance, and the profound impact of standing firm in the face of entitlement, lies, and recklessness that had long defined my family dynamic. Now that you've heard everything, the repeated thefts, the recklessness, the chaos that my brother caused, and the tangled web of lies and favoritism from my parents, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Could you have stayed calm when your own car was stolen, knowing your family was actively trying to undermine you? Have you ever had to stand up to people who were supposed to care for you, only to realize that asserting boundaries was the only way to protect yourself? And if you've ever dealt with someone like my brother, someone who constantly oversteps and refuses to respect limits, how did you finally get them to understand consequences? Leave your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I want to know how you navigated your own family chaos and what lessons you learned about protecting yourself and your possessions. Have you ever had a situation where lying family members tried to cover for someone else's reckless actions? How did you handle it? Your advice and stories could help others facing similar family dynamics. Day began like any other, deceptively ordinary. The kind of day where the air feels calm and the house hums quietly with the soft noises of family life, completely unaware of the storm that would soon erupt and forever change my sense of safety and trust. I was still recovering from a cesarean section, less than 6 weeks postpartum, my body tender and raw, each movement a reminder of the fragility that came with bringing new life into the world. The chores of the day felt manageable, folding clothes and tidying up, a rhythmic, almost meditative act, until a single, piercing scream shattered the quiet and sent a bolt of pure panic through me. My daughter's voice, urgent, terrified, and so desperate that it cut straight through my chest, called for her father, and in that instant, every fiber of my being snapped into alert. I ran without thinking, adrenaline surging through my veins, muscles burning from exertion I hadn't anticipated, the world around me blurring into a chaotic mix of winter air, distant traffic, and the pounding of my own heart. And then I saw them. My newborn son, helplessly confined to his stroller, rolling perilously toward the street, the wheels spinning faster than my mind could process. My daughter, running desperately to intercept him, had already fallen, scraping her tiny hands and knees on the rough pavement. The terror was immediate and suffocating. Every second stretched into an eternity as I lunged toward the stroller, my mind imagining the worst possible outcomes, the sharp taste of fear filling my mouth. The thought of what might have happened in even a single second of delay was unbearable. I snatched both children up into my arms, my own body trembling from the sheer force of panic and the effort of protecting them, and I felt the weight of every past anxiety, every moment of sleeplessness, every awareness of my husband's carelessness coalesce into a single, undeniable realization. The man who was supposed to safeguard my children had failed completely. I remember scanning frantically for him, my chest tight, every nerve screaming, and seeing him standing on the neighbor's driveway, oblivious, chatting as though nothing were happening, as though the two small lives I had just saved from imminent danger were insignificant, as though my terror and his children's vulnerability were invisible. The anger that rose within me was volcanic, intermingled with sheer disbelief, a hot, choking fury that pressed against my lungs. How could someone be so blind, so negligent, so utterly incapable of recognizing the weight of responsibility they had voluntarily accepted when they became a parent? The question burned in my mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. My children needed protection, safety, and immediate care. And the stark reality was that the person who should have been their guardian had failed in the most fundamental way possible. The streets of our neighborhood, always dangerous due to the chaotic layout and traffic that hurtled past at reckless speeds, now felt like a gauntlet, a minefield in which even the slightest miscalculation could lead to irreparable tragedy. My daughter, trembling and clutching at me, her hands scraped and bleeding, became a living embodiment of the consequences of negligence, and my newborn son, resting against me with wide, innocent eyes, a tiny being utterly dependent on my vigilance, intensified the urgency of every decision, every movement. I felt my heart pound, not just from exertion, but from the realization of what could have happened if I had been a mere second slower. Every instinct screamed at me to protect, to secure, to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. Yet the bitter truth settled over me. The failure I had witnessed was the result not of chance, but of chronic carelessness and inability to prioritize what mattered most. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, I felt a rush of physical pain that made the terror almost secondary. My cesarean stitches had torn during the frantic movement to save my children, and the ache spread through my abdomen with every heartbeat, every movement, a sharp, piercing reminder of the cost of vigilance in a world where another adult, entrusted with care, had abandoned their responsibility. I hurriedly tended to my daughter's scraped hands and knees, cleaning and bandaging them with trembling fingers, my body simultaneously racked with pain, and my mind racing with the almost unthinkable scenarios of what could have transpired. The reality that my newborn son had been seconds away from being thrown into the path of speeding traffic filled me with a cold, suffocating dread that lingered long after he was safe in my arms. The video footage from our neighbor, when it arrived later, made the events even more surreal, confirming what I had feared, yet could scarcely believe at the time. My husband had left the stroller unsecured, had allowed it to begin rolling toward the street without noticing, and had remained completely unmoved, his hands on his head, his gaze vacant, while my daughter ran, fell, and desperately tried to save her brother. The cold realization of how close we had come to catastrophe, combined with the betrayal of trust I felt toward him, created a mental storm that left me reeling. This was supposed to be a moment of family care and cohesion, yet it had transformed into a near-death experience, leaving my maternal instincts raw, my anger smoldering, and my trust irrevocably shaken. I packed the children and left for my parents' house, the drive tense and silent, every jolt of the car, a reminder of how precarious our lives had been in that moment. My body was sore, every muscle trembling from adrenaline and exertion, every thought consumed with how narrowly we had avoided disaster. I could not shake the image of my son rolling toward the street, the terrifying seconds that stretched into what felt like hours. the helplessness that had gripped me as I realized that a partner, someone I had expected to protect my children alongside me, had abandoned his duty completely. Even after the immediate danger passed, the emotional fallout was relentless. Fear lingered in my chest, a constant pressure that refused to abate, a reminder that the house we had called home was no longer a safe place. Not while someone entrusted with the children's care remained incapable of paying attention. The anger toward my husband was visceral, burning deep inside, intertwining with the ongoing fear for my children's safety, creating a persistent state of hypervigilance that made every subsequent day feel tenuous and fragile. Every step outside, every minor misstep by the children, sent a surge of panic through me. And the memory of that near tragedy became a lens through which I viewed every action, every choice, every lapse in attention from him. This event forced me to confront hard truths about our life and our marriage. It made me realize that vigilance, responsibility, and foresight are not optional traits in parenthood. They are the very foundation of safety and trust. When those foundations fail, even for a moment, the consequences are immediate and severe. The terror, the physical strain, the emotional upheaval, all of it was a stark warning, a line that could not be crossed again. I understood with absolute clarity that my children's lives depended on constant awareness, and that placing them in the hands of someone unable or unwilling to maintain that awareness was no longer tolerable. Even now, months later, the echoes of that day resonate in my mind. I see the stroller, hear my daughter's screams, feel the icy wind of that evening pressing against my face as I ran, trembling and raw, to rescue the children. I remember the exact weight of their bodies in my arms, the panic in my chest, the rage I felt at the complete lack of responsibility demonstrated by my husband. The fear and the fury remain intertwined, a permanent imprint on my psyche, shaping how I approach every interaction, every precaution, every small decision. The lessons of that day, the fragility of life, the weight of responsibility, and the absolute necessity of vigilance have been burned into my consciousness, and I know I will carry them with me for the rest of my life. After hearing what happened that terrifying day, the moment my newborn son nearly rolled into the street, the panic, the injuries to my daughter, and the absolute inaction of my husband, I need to ask you, how would you respond if someone entrusted with your children's safety completely failed at the most critical moment? Could you forgive a mistake like that? Or would it change the way you see your relationship forever? And what boundaries would you set to make sure your children are never at that kind of risk again? I also want to hear from parents who have faced moments of near tragedy. How did you process it, and what changes did you make to prevent anything similar from happening again? Do you think people with ADHD or other attention challenges can truly be trusted with childcare, or are there precautions that need to be non-negotiable? Share your stories, your advice, and your reflections in the comments. Your input might help someone else stay vigilant and keep their family safe. Thank you for staying with me until the end. How would you have acted in the protagonist's place? Write your thoughts in the comments. More fresh and controversial stories every day on my profile. Like and subscribe to this channel.